You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood, art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today I'm excited. I'm doing another artist interview. My guest today is Cristallina Fischetti, and she's got a new exhibition opening in London soon. So I am very excited to hear all about that and learn more about her work and her process. So thank you so much for coming to join me, Cristallina.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor, and it's so cool to be on the other end of it. Usually I'm interviewing people, so it's wonderful to be interviewed. I'm really, really appreciating this. So thank you.
Yeah, and as long as we're mentioning that you are a podcaster yourself, I think right off the bat, it's good to make sure that we're plugging everything that we can for people. So do you want to tell listeners about your show? And of course, if you want to find it, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a podcast called Hype A, like type A, but Hype A, and it's about amplifying voices in the arts. And what that means is that I interview people to, draw the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes, all the nitty gritty, the dirty, the ugly, the beautiful as well, and hopefully inspire people to get into the arts.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's going to be right up the alley of a lot of my listeners. So like I said, if you want to listen to Hype A, you can check the links in the show notes. And of course, I'm sure you can find it on Spotify and anywhere else that you're listening. As long as we're doing all of that housekeeping with the plugs and stuff, I do want to mention the Arts Madness tournament. We are heading into round 3, and I am really excited. I've taken a sneak peek at some of the results, and I'm really shocked by how close some of these matches were. In round 2, Dale Chihuly just barely eked out the win against Keith Haring. And I love now that we have in round 3, Chihuly's Sea Forms up against Jason DeCarey's Taylor's Underwater Sculpture Museum. I did not plan that as I laid out the brackets, but that seems like a fun sort of coincidence. I am curious, Cristallina, as an artist yourself and an art lover, who are some of your favorite artists, who's influenced and inspired you?
These are really good questions. I did make notes because, as you can understand and imagine, and I'm sure your listeners can appreciate, I've got thousands and thousands, but I want to narrow it down. So these are the ones. The Hilma af Klint, which I think is pretty much an obvious one when it comes to my work, because she was a spiritual artist and she dealt with spiritual abstraction, cosmology, symbolic language in her painting. Love her work. She's just such an icon, even today. And then I've got Carla Accardi, who's an Italian artist. She passed away, but she was also from Sicily, and my family are from Sicily. So she kind of means a lot to me. And I saw her work at Prada Fondazione Prada in Milan a couple of years ago, and just blew me away. So yeah, Italian, Sicilian heritage, let's plug that in for sure. Abstraction with experimental materials and sign-like structures, very, very textural works. And then one of your own American artists, David Hammonds. So he's a textural artist, very cool artist from Illinois, I believe. He uses found materials inspired by urban environments. Aligns with, of course, my US experience as well and transatlantic practice. I've lived in Los Angeles and I've been back and forth in the US. Saw his work recently at Hauser and Wirth downtown in Los Angeles. Really cool, very performative, very, very cool work. And then another USA, Robert Motherwell. So Motherwell, OG, philosophical abstract artist, gestural abstraction. There's also an emotional language of this painting. Very phallic, but very connected to the Tao. So very connected to Eastern art. And then Helen Frankenthaler, his ex-wife, also just an amazing artist. So I conducted a workshop at Dulwich Picture Gallery in London in the style of Helen Frankenthaler, and she was really into soak stain painting and colour filled painting, as you know. fluidity and material exploration. I just love the fact that she's also a woman as well. So just an amazing, amazing artist, and just so cool. There's pictures of her drinking a whiskey on her paintings and having a cigarette. Just love her. Massive girl fan over her. And then lastly would be my ancestor, Italian, Fedele Fischetti. He's an artist that was mainly based during the Rococo period, and murals, and connected to the royal family in Italy, in Naples, and Caserta, which is a palace in Naples. So yeah, those are the ones I had to bring down. Yeah.
Yeah, and some wonderful artists in that list. I'm noticing a theme emerging with Frankenthaler and everyone, very, very abstract, getting into that non-objective territory about like the fields of color and all of that. So I think it probably gives us a nice segue. Your work, which is going on display in London, can you tell us the gallery and the dates that it's opening? Because I see a very clear parallel with your work in the latest Alchemia collection compared to the influences you just named. But can you give us the details for that?
Amazing. Yeah. So my first show in a while. It's my first show since 2022. The last show was in a gallery in London town. This show is going to be in a church. So it's going to be in Marylebone Church in London, where I was born and raised in Marylebone. It's a little village in London, and it's very, very pretty, very quaint, full of actors, full of creative people. And it's actually in the church where I would go to, and my GP, my general practitioner, is downstairs. So there's a real connection there. So the dates for the Alchemia show, the first one of many this year. So I'm kind of doing it in incremental parts because I've got such a massive body of work. I'm showing like 9 works for this show, and the opening night's on the 23rd of April. So it's a Friday night. And then it's open through to the 18th or 19th of May. So it's my first show in an institution of this kind. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how it plays its role metaphysically within the work and with the people that come to see it.
Yeah. And, listeners in London, obviously, I would encourage you to go check it out. But for those of us who can't see it, the piece we're going to discuss later is one of the works from the show. And, you can see an image on, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening. I've got it in the episode cover art here today. But I want to take a step back a little bit to get at your sort of artistic development. You've already alluded to the fact that you're a fan of people like Hilma af Klint, who, listeners might remember. She did a lot of work that was spiritually guided. She would hold seances, her group of the five, and she would say that she was just kind of dictating what the spirits were guiding her to put onto the canvas. What's your background and approach and philosophy of art, and kind of, if you I love a good origin story. How did it all get started for you in the arts, and what kind of shaped your lens, if you will?
It's a great question. It's also a big question because it can also be answered very simply 2 ways. I come from a very creative family, so there's that, and the other way is to show you a bit of the arc verbally. So I started really being impassioned by dance. So I trained as a professional ballet dancer, jazz dancer, and contemporary dancer. And I had to make a choice between that and my school, my academic learning, because I was really falling behind. I was training after school pretty much 4 or 5 times a week, and I was doing performances, at least 3 performances a year, and then I was doing commercial work, which was from the age of 5, publicity, like photographs, commercials and things like that, and then of course auditions. So I had to make a choice, and it was a really difficult choice, and I was young, and so my parents were in charge of me, and they said, look, we gotta help you focus on your academic career, because we know you're dyslexic and you speak 4 languages, and it's very confusing for people out there to understand that. But get the grounding first, learn the rules, and then if you want, you can break them later. So I kind of did that. And so I had extracurricular activity. I went to English school. And I also went to Italian school. And I then had to slow down my, dance training, essentially. I was still doing it, but I had to slow it down. And then, but my English school was not so English as you can imagine, because it had a very Indian Ayurvedic background to it. So yeah, there's that philosophical, spiritual connection there, where Ayurveda, yoga, all things mystical were integrated within the academic teaching. And I was initiated into transcendental meditation, which the school is based on, essentially. It's very rock and roll, because actually the founder of the school is connected to the Beatles, because they had the same transcendental meditation teacher back in India. So there's that. And so, yeah, I practice yoga, and of course my academic study then started to excel. And I really focus, as you can imagine, on humanities and language, and, of course, the art, art always. And then I continued my Italian school as well on the side of that. And I did Italian GCSE. I can't remember what the equivalent is in the US, but it's a higher form of examination learning at the age of 16, 17. And so I did that. I excelled in that. And then I got I did really well at school, actually, much to the surprise of my teachers, I think. But I really enjoyed learning, and I think that it's really part of my identity now as someone who's still researching, still very academic. I went to university, I did higher learning and my master's degree. And then all throughout all of that, I had this very strong spiritual and psychic connection, which is God-given, or it's in the blood, or however you wish to see it. But I have an appreciation for the non-physical world. And then, of course, within all of that, I'm me now talking to you today about my work, which is very mystical.
So what's interesting to me about that, well, I could go off on a number of different lanes, but one of the things that strikes me is, before you were a visual artist, in the professional sense, you were a performing artist, and you also had, you've talked about background with meditation and things like that. And so I'm just imagining probably a lot of like body awareness in just like deeply ingrained in you. And I'm curious if that comes out in your artistic process. Like, are you one of those like very physically oriented person, and the gestural movements, and like you get where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, sometimes I get exhausted being in the studio, because it is so physical. At least the way that I approach the painting is very physical. It's based on ritual. Like, the process of painting is ritual. I start my studio day, lighting incense and then burning a candle. And then, I'm soaking a bit like Helen Frankenthaler, inspired by her, soaking lots and lots of not only shop bought paint, like acrylics and oil paint, that soaks into the canvas that's on the ground, but also I use materials that aren't shop bought, like red wine, like coffee, just like materials that are also botanical. I really enjoy working with turmeric as well. That's one thing I really love to do. And then when it dries, or even when it's not drying, I get the staple gun and I start to frame it around the actual physical structure of the painting frame. So not only is it heavy, the canvas, but it's also wet, it's dripping, and I've got to make sure that I'm holding the piece strong enough so that I can staple it down as I'm working with it at the same time. And I turn it around and it's on the ground again, then I lift it up again and I put it on the wall. So there's a lot of physical movement to it. I sometimes video myself during the process of making, and it is really interesting because you can see me thinking and non-thinking throughout the process of it. So there are moments where it looks like I'm in complete trance when I'm working, and it seems very natural. It seems maybe there are patterns there that are learnt and then new ones that are informed, like the way that the paint leaks into certain areas and there are certain openings there, and I look around it and I dance around it almost, and I then look at it from a different perspective and I go, oh wow, there's something I can work on here, and then I get some more material and then I work with that, and then once it starts to dry over a process of a few days or a few weeks, I start to integrate the more textural elements at times. Not all of my works are completely 3D. But yeah, there's the textural elements where you see me knotting and then you see me further stapling down. So, but yeah, basically by the end of a process, my arms hurt, and particularly my hips and my thighs as well, because I'm, squatting and I'm going up and down, and having a yogic practice and that physical background really does help to contain it, I would say, in a best way that I don't hurt myself more than anything.
But it also sounds like there's a little bit of like an intuitive sense of, you're going a bit by feel as you're doing this, is what I'm understanding. And I do want to ask about, your use of unconventional materials, because I noticed as I look through the collection, there's a lot of mixed media. And in that answer, you talked about using coffee and turmeric. I can't say the word turmeric, but you know what I'm getting at. And I'm curious, people choose different materials for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe, it's like Jackson Pollock trying to get a little bit of grit on there for the texture. Or I think of, a favorite friend of the pod, Herb Williams uses crayons because it evokes that nostalgic sense because of the smell of the wax and things like that. And so I'm curious, as you're selecting, a wine to soak a fabric instead of a thinned out or diluted paint or an ink or a more conventional material, what's your thought process? Why are you selecting some of those different materials?
I think you're definitely on the money there. It is intuitive. It's definitely intuitive. I go for the things that I see at hand, or maybe it's part of my narrative to include my multiculturalism too. Wine being so associated with my Italian heritage, and then coffee being so associated with Colombia. I'm South American as well. But they're also medicinal. The work that I create is abstract medicine, and it's a term that I coined back in 2020, and it's also part of my alternative therapy service as well. But the materials, so for example, wine is medicinal. It's in the Romans called it vino veritas. So, you would get the truth. I mean, there's lots of alchemy, I would say mainly witchcraft, let's say, for the good, in order to draw out authenticity and healing most of all. Coffee has massive healing properties and can regress aging as well if it's filtered in the right way, and there aren't any negative, let's say, ingredients that are mixed in with that. As if you can get the purest version, then great. But I would say I have used materials that also come from my body. I call them materials. I think it's because it's part of the material world rather than the non-material world. So, for example, I cut my finger once while preparing for a painting and a show a few years ago. It was a group show, and I cut my finger really badly. And the blood was dripping all over the canvas. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to leave this in. I just, when you cut yourself and you're sort of in shock because it's kind of weirdly beautiful, but also very surreal at the same time, but also like, I need to deal with this, but I'm also in shock.
Mhm.
It was a combination of those very human factors, and I included the drops on my painting. So there are pictures on my website from previous works where you can also see the back of the painting, where you can see those specific blood marks as well.
So that's interesting. So you're really largely selecting stuff for, that very personal but also historical meaning and symbolism. And I love the use of the term like witchcraft there, because, like historically, our term witch came from, words that meant like basically a wise elder. And the meaning just sort of evolved and shifted over time. But I think that's a really cool way to approach. And I always love when I talk to an artist and I ask a question like that, and there is genuinely a thoughtful response and not just like, well, it was just lying around. So I spilled something on the canvas. So I appreciate that about you and your work. And now after a short break, I want to dive a little bit more into a specific piece. And so we'll be talking about that when we come back. Welcome back. Today, I'm really happy with this one because I get to pawn off the pronunciation work, because alchemia is as far as I can get. But Christallina, can you tell us the name of this piece? Because longtime listeners know I can barely pronounce an English word, and I'm not getting into the Latin.
Yeah, it's also, again, it's a play on words. I'm very into language and languages, and it's called alchemia, mea sum, alchemia. So, yeah, would you like me to just talk about the title?
Let's start with the translation, because as somebody who speaks English kind of and high school Spanish, I'm thinking I'm recognizing some roots in there, but can as a knowledgeable person, can you translate it for us?
Yeah, it's basically alchemia is a word that's alchemy translation in Italian, and then mia is Italian for mine, which I know your listeners understand. So you can there's a connotation there where there's alchemia mia, so alchemy mine, okay, and then mea sum is of mine, and that means that's from Latin, of mine. And of course, all Latin words come from Latin, and yeah, and then and then alchemia at the end of it, which is my essential full circle word that includes all of that and the meaning. It's a word that I studied when doing the research before starting the series based on alchemy, and it is connected to Greek as well as ancient Egypt, or otherwise known as ancient Kemet. I have a prose that I wrote that I also did a sort of spoken word about the other day, and it's in English, and then it's in Italian and in Spanish. But I think that this particular painting and the title of its work, I know that it's, for me, the great work included within the whole series. It's gold, it's very loud, it's very out there, but it's also part of the great work that one finds as an alchemist in the laboratory. And I started off with very strong colors in the series. They started with peach and orange, and they were very painterly, so to speak, without any texture and three-dimensionality to it, to then end with alchemia. And yeah, it's a process of inner transformation and alchemical transformation in the physical through painting, through the process and ritual act of painting this specific piece. And me. And I would love to share this little prose, if you like, if your listeners would be up for it.
Yeah, if it gives some insight, I'm always happy to.
Okay, so alchemia, from the ugliness, from the disgustingness, from the pain, from the panic, from the survival, from the darkness, from the nothingness, from the isolation, from the bullshit, from the sacrifice, from the anger. I fly higher than ever, out of this world, from the universe. Alchemy, mea, mea sum, alchemia, crystalline, Cristallina. So hopefully I'm able to swear there, because I did actually say a very London swear word there.
I'll bleep that if that's okay with you.
And also I included the sort of English version or anglicized version of alchemia at the end. And so essentially it's everything that I just mentioned, from base metal or base emotions, base energies, base experiences into gold.
Yeah, and so if we can just like unpack this a little bit, your series is essentially all about alchemy, and the first association that people have with alchemy is that transformative nature. The I think if you know one thing about alchemists, they were trying to turn lead into gold, like the quest to transform base materials. Can you talk about like why alchemy was the touchstone for you that you wanted to develop this series on?
To be honest, it was a theme that had been in my energy field for the last 3 years. I felt very guided by non-physical beings to explore it through painting. One of my favorite books, I'm a massive book reader, is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And every time I read it, there's something new in there for me to learn and to refine in my life, whether it's through relationships, romantically, platonically, or familial, or even in my career. But also it's part of my life purpose, being someone who is integrating the light aspect, the light goddess, the light witch, and the dark goddess, the dark witch. I think it's important for me to experience authenticity in all of its aspects without harming anyone. And this series, when I embarked on it, was not at all what I expected it to to be at all. And there have been physical experiences around and during the process that have been part of my personal alchemical journey.
Now, you've already kind of alluded to a bit of this as you in the first segment, we talked a little bit about your process, and you've already said this turned out not the way you intended. But I do want to, just looking at this one, can you walk us through your process? Like, I am the type of artist who when I start a piece, I'm starting with like probably half a dozen thumbnails and then thinking like, oh, I like this arrangement. And then, oh, I'm going to take this element from this one and everything before I touch the canvas. But other people work more intuitively and they're putting things and adjusting, and, with your mixed media process, alchemy makes perfect sense. But can you tell me, what was it like? What was the first step with this piece?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's I'm sure you can understand and know that it's weird kind of backtracking the process as an artist, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an odd one. Well, I knew it had to be gold because it's called alchemy, for goodness sake. So, it's based on alchemy. It's called alchemia. So there had to be something that was gold. Otherwise, what's the point? I had to make a very obvious statement on that. So I thought, okay, gold, let's get some gold. So I went to the art shop and I bought gold paint. I bought gold specifically for metal, old gold. I had various types of gold paint, low grade, high grade, low value, high value paint. And so, yeah, I had my canvas already in stock in the studio. And so I just knew that there was 2 weeks where I had this white canvas, and I just knew I had to get on stage and put my big girl pants on and paint this gold painting and be very loud about it. And I'm sure you can understand where I'm coming from as well with this is it took a very bold, courageous act, a very bold, courageous leap on stage to start painting this canvas on the ground in gold. It was a very canonical, powerful process and object and ritual. So I basically started with gold. Then I had these other canvases that were just raw canvas on the side, and I knew I also had to paint on that too. That's the way that I process the 3D paintings. And I wanted to integrate plastic as well, where I wanted to incorporate the idea that and inspire artists that you don't need to always have perfect material. You can use packaging material. You can use materials that are from your kitchen. And I have had this experience of processing painting with packaging materials, so plastic. And in my Hello Again show, my solo show, then I had this poster child painting that was called Happiness is Transient, and it was very three-dimensional, very similar in this now signature that I have with other bits of canvas and rope and tools that you use to create an installation or hanging fixtures that I put actually on the canvas. So I wanted to continue that thread visually. And there's other paintings in the series with plastic too. So it's kind of a process of wrapping, packing, holding, embracing, ripping, cutting, pulling, stapling.
So that's really interesting to me. Like plastic specifically, I find a fascinating material to work with, not just because it's a pain in some ways. I mean, nothing sticks to plastic and, all that. But also like the idea of transforming a, seen as less than material, into a piece of fine art. Like that feels like an alchemist's transition, but also, plastic comes from a term meaning shapeable, workable, so it's like the alchemy is about the plasticity of material. And I'm curious, as you integrate plastic into the work, are you trying to have that as very evident in the piece for people to realize it's this base material, or is that a sort of hidden detail to be discovered?
Yeah, it's the latter. I don't want it to look like plastic, bizarrely. I want it to be an elevated version of plastic. So it's almost like putting plastic on a shrine and going, oh, wow, rather than putting it in the ocean. As also acrylic paint is plastic. So there's no difference. It's just a different vibration of it or a frequency of it. It's still plastic. And so I like to play on the idea of material and also materia, which is prima materia, which is, what we're talking about here with alchemy. And I think, if anything, I like for it to look like skin. It sounds really morbid. But yeah, I like it to look tangible but familiar.
Sort of organic.
Organic, yeah.
Okay. And so you've just to sort of get back to the original question here, because I did want to go through this journey and the steps and understand it. So you gather your materials and you start with some bold splashes of color and just like, overcoming the daunting nature of staring at a blank canvas by just making some bold strokes. And then are you the type of person who tries to work in a continuous session? Are you the type of person who lets it sit and comes back to it with fresh eyes and revise? And I obviously read a lot of accounts, and everyone's got a different sort of process there and how they conceptualize, especially these abstract pieces. So like how do you evaluate the work as it's going?
These are really brilliant questions. So thank you so much, Kyle. I would say that how I approach it, I think innately, I feel like I'm on stage when I'm painting, honestly. And weirdly, it's not for the audience that I'm painting. It's a ritual that's performed on stage, but it seems intimate. And it's communication, it's a conversation between me, the painting, and spirit. And it's, let's say, an hour's act. It's an hour's act. So I'm working, processing for about an hour, as I mentioned before, turning it around, looking at it from different perspectives. And then there's a moment where I go, okay, pause. And so I pause. And then I come back and I'll look at it again. I won't touch it. And I go, okay, this needs to sit like this so that I don't ruin it, which is usually it's when I'm seeing material being choreographed through me, but also the actual natural surrender or natural movement and flow of the material itself, where it just seems like this would be a perfect snapshot of how I would like to keep it. So I better leave it, because otherwise I'm just going to ruin it. So I have to pull myself away. Everything goes dark, let's say, and then, because I come off stage and then I give it a couple of days. I come back on stage, which is the studio, and I see if it's dry. I put my finger on it and see if it's dry enough for me to continue working and processing it, which usually means me pulling it up and putting it up on the wall vertically, and then I process again.
So this is interesting to me because you keep talking about the stage and the performance, and it leads me to wonder, is the performance and the stage and the ritual the means of creating the visual art, or is the visual art the artifact of the creative performance? And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I don't really know how to fully answer that. All I know that is it. I'm sure loads of artists say this, is that the artwork is a product of the process from beginning, middle, and end. And then it ends up becoming, especially if you're wanting to sell your work or become a commercial artist, it becomes an entity in its own right that then is detached from you. But I will say that throughout the process of the making, I'm also experiencing transformation in my life, which I'll just share. My best friend passed away during the process of these series. My stepfather thank you. My stepfather passed away during the process of this series, and I ended a relationship during the process of this series. So again, when I say it's performative, it doesn't necessarily mean it's like a narcissistic, hey, look at me, aren't I wonderful? It's more, this is a stage where I'm feeling very vulnerable, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And the best way that I can heal is through the process, the act of painting. And it bizarrely, amazingly keeps me centered. It keeps me in the present moment. It's a joy. And I understand it reflects back to me like why I'm doing it. It gives me you know, an understanding and of why I'm here, what I'm doing here.
Yeah. And to be clear, when I talk about performance and performative or anything, like I don't mean it in the sense that some people will use a term like performative as like hollow or shallow or anything. Like I'm thinking of, because of your background
Yeah.
in performance and dance and like, body awareness and the movement being tracked on the canvas, like I recognize that can be all very deep and meaningful, and I'm just curious about how you're conceptualizing it.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that I'll just chime in that there are people, let's say, outside of the art world that could see it as quite a hollow phrasing, but I think that there is also an aspect of the process which is performative. I'm also now doing spoken word when I'm talking about this particular painting that we're talking about, the gold one. So as I said, I did a performance where I was sharing the prose of this piece. So again, it's tapping into that vulnerability, but the voice is part of the art, and the mode to transfer that visual language as well.
Yeah. And, for me, when I'm looking at work and I look at a painting and I start thinking of the performance and the action, to me, I really like that because it feels to me like I'm getting a sense of the physicality of the act of creation. And to me, that feels very intimate because it's connected with the artist and not like the artist's assistant who physically rendered the piece. Like I get the sense that this is a more direct connection to the artist and their work. And that's why I really like process-driven pieces.
Yeah.
I am largely a modernist at heart. I like a good, abstract color field, and I love stuff that explores the resonance of the play off of different hues juxtaposed, and the way that the materials come together, and all of those different things that you're getting at here. And that's why I found this an interesting body of work, and I wanted to have you on the show to talk more about it. Now, just one last break, and I want to wrap things up with some of the main ideas, takeaways, and a bit of advice for fellow creators. Welcome back. My guest this week is Cristallina Fischetti. The collection is Alchemia, and I am always fascinated by transformation in work. And I think alchemy is like a perfect sort of metaphor for the artistic process. And I love seeing that in these canvases. Can you talk a little bit about, like, for people in London who are coming to see your show at the end of April, what are they going to see, experience? What do you hope they take from it as the artist? Because, everyone's experience is different and what they're looking for, but I think we rarely get to hear the artist's voice and what they're intending. So can you give us your perspective on what you want the audience to see and appreciate in the work?
Thank you. Well, the aim is to inspire, to heal, to uplift, to wow, and to have fun. That's really pretty much it. I want to make sure that people who are coming to see the show are seeing a body of work or snippets of a full cycle of 33 paintings that is experimental, still academic, painterly, connected with the persona of me, but also the identities that I am, in a place that is part of ritual, which is a church. It doesn't always have to be a show in a white cube space. And I'd like I'd like to have conversations with people who aren't just artists or in the art world, about the works, but also maybe have conversations about their own non-physical experience. Some call it mystical, some call it spiritual, some call it religious, whatever it is. I'd love to share and listen. I'm very open-minded and I love to have these conversations. And then in terms of the art world, I'd love for conversations whereby we can discuss further spaces where these works can have a home, maybe in a large church or cathedral or a temple or even a mosque. It would be so amazing to really think large and expansive about where art can be seen. I would say for me, working with major institutions in London, in Europe, and the US.
Now, as long as we're talking about shows and stuff, can you give us a little peek behind the curtain of how a show is put together? Because, you're navigating the space, you're working with people, you're looking at the physical limitations of the space. And I think there's something really interesting about work with a spiritual dimension being displayed in a spiritual building. But are you choosing the order that the canvases are going in? Are you, looking at the limitations of the space, or are you thinking, oh, this one leads into this one, and this is the final piece I want people to eventually get to because it ties it all together? Like, can you just walk us through that thought process and how the show is like physically installed and laid out?
These are really good questions because I think it's important to talk about the setting up, preparing for a show. So basically, I have a meeting with a curator, and the curator and I discuss, first of all, the dimensions of the space, and or the limitations that may cause challenges with installing the works for the show. And then we do exactly talk about that. Like, is there a process, a cycle, a history, a theme, sub theme within the theme of Alchemia that we need to look into visually? We also look at whether the space is viable, supportive for non-able-bodied people to be able to experience the space too. I think for people who are visually impaired, fully visually impaired, I think that's something that I would like to look into in the future, and like how I could create extra sensory experience for the visually impaired. But that's a conversation for another day. But it's a back of my mind for sure. I'm not sure. Maybe there will be incense burning. I think it would be lovely to have that within the space. It would really be in keeping. So that's something that I'd like to speak to the curator about. But yeah, we talk about that. But then there's also packaging, and like these are most of the works are well, the most, I would say, iconic pieces are 3-dimensional. So we look at how, which logistic company is going to be supportive and also financially economical for the artist and everyone involved, who is, there's a positive recompensation for all. I've had works where they've been in crates that look like coffins. I know that your listeners are aware, yourself as well as aware, that these crates are very, very costly, specifically when they're being shipped transatlantic. So how do we cost cut? How do we also support environmental issues along with that too? Like, do we put it on a ship? Do we put it on a plane? Do we take it by car? Do we take it by van? Like, I don't know. These are all things that are all part of the process. And then the other side of it is press. So really having a very clear, 100% understanding, clear vision of what it is that is being spoken about, what the theme is, and and connecting and collaborating with like-minded people, but also in the art world and the academic circles, as well as the spiritual circles too, and in different languages, in the languages that I speak, is highly important to my brand and the getting the word out there.
Yeah, so it's a lot of stuff that you have to consider, but I like that the art, well, with contemporary artists, that curators are open to the conversation of, what are the themes that you're trying to get at, and sub themes, and, working with you to determine the optimal placement. And, I think that is all fascinating. I think last year did an interview with a curator who was talking about like all the different logistical concerns, and it is amazing the way that you're able to work through that and come through the whole process to get to put a show on is just absolutely mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
But I commend you for doing it. And now, last little bit of advice, because a lot of my listeners are fellow creatives or aspiring creatives. And so when I get to talk to an artist, I always like to ask, what advice would you give an aspiring artist?
Thank you so much for this interview, by the way. I've really had a lot of fun, and it's my first interview in a long time. So yeah, very, very, very humbled and grateful. So thank you. I would say that the first thing is go ahead and do it anyway. That's number one. Go ahead and do it anyway. Number two, get really good at what you're doing. Okay, get really good at what you're doing. Number three, research heavily what you're doing. Everything that's connected with what you're doing, research it, whether it's the practice of it, whether it's the theory behind it, whether it's books, podcasts, interviews, even, as well as documentaries. Get as much knowledge that you can with your niche thing that you're doing. And know that the art world is actually incredibly small. Yes, there is a saying that no man's an island. That is true. But sometimes as artists, we have to be an island. And then that island gets to have a bridge and connect with other islands. But I will say that the art island is slightly bigger than our personal island. And it is small. And with that, I think it's something where you don't need to feel intimidated. That's really important, not to feel intimidated, like you can't achieve, or you can't get into those specific rooms that you want to get into. Build yourself up in such a way that you create really good work, fantastic work. Work on yourself internally as well, so that you become the best version of who you are. Make those connections, and those rooms, those doors will open for you to be present at.
That is fantastic. Take time to hone your craft, do the work, put in the hours to become the best version of it. Do the research, do the homework. There are no shortcuts, but also have the courage to create. And once you reach that level where you are genuinely proud of what you're creating, have the courage to put it out there, because people will respond. Wonderful. I could not think of a better way to wrap it up. So thank you once again for your time and your insights. Cristallina Fischetti, I really appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation. And, listeners, if you want to check out the show, check the links in the show notes. We'll have all the details. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.